What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. I've done quite a few videos talking about Shaquille O'Neal, talking about how, I think that he's a great player, but at the end of the day, I know he does a lot of self promotion, always talking about his 4 championships. Um, but at the end of the day, I feel like Shaq, in the grand scheme of things, has become overrated. Okay, and I feel like he's a little overrated. Now, look, when you say that word, overrated, people think you're saying that someone sucks. In reality, I think Shaq is a top 4 center. Okay. Um, I thought that had he took conditioning and took preparation more seriously, if he had the Mamba mentality or the Jordan, uh, you know, personality makeup, or someone like Larry Bird, who totally maximized his potential, got the most out of his potential, I have to say. Shaq could have been the GOAT. But oftentimes, when you can dominate a game physically, um, you can take advantage of that. And your preparation for everything is different. Whereas when you're on a more even playing field, like Kobe was, he maximized his game with, you know, uh, skill and working at the craft and perfecting his craft to the best of his ability, as did the Michael Jordan, as did Larry Bird. Or someone like Shaq who could dominate physically, he wasn't as pressured to add to his game. He did add to his game a little bit. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't just raw brute power for his entire career. He did have some skill, but he did not, to me at least, he wasn't as dominant as advertised. Okay? I want to go through what I've talked about before, maybe a little bit deeper. Now, for one, let's talk about offensively. Now, for his career, I believe Shaq shot something over 58% from the floor, which for his era is remarkable. Now, of course, you got guys today like DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond who shoot over 60% from the floor. That's more indicative of the era that they're playing in. Had they played in a more defensive era of the 80s, 90s, especially the 2000s, they probably would have been more in the mid 50% range rather than shooting at high 60s and 70s. And it's not me knocking the guys of today. I'm not doing that. Okay, a lot of guys say, "Oh, you only said," no, it's not. It's just because I've watched basketball for 30 years and I know the way the game is played now. Centers have less resistance as far as scoring the basketball. Especially if you're a guy like DeAndre Jordan and Drummond. A lot of times they're just getting alley oops and very very high percentage shots, and there's less resistance. Um, but for his era, Shaq shot 50%. That's phenomenal. Um, but a lot of his field goals probably came within 5 to 6 feet of the basket because he was so overwhelmingly dominant. Okay. Um, and he was expected to shoot something like that. As a matter of fact, he should have shot even higher. And I'll tell you why. Kevin McHale, who comparatively is much smaller at 6'10" and 210, 215 pounds, had a couple of seasons shooting between 58 to 60% from the floor. And he's not nearly as powerful as Shaq. Shout out to Jesse for giving me this awesome statistic. Charles Barkley, when you take away his 3-point shots, if you just incorporate twos, shot the same percentage as Shaq did for his career, over 58% from twos. Now, mind you, Barkley took mid-range shots as well as shots in the paint. So Barkley overall, 6'4.5", 250 to 60 pounds, right? Was able to shoot the same percentage as Shaq did, with his big ass camped right on the basket. I remember hearing, I didn't take much note of it at the time, being I was a teenager, but I remember um, Bill Walton. No, it wasn't Bill Walton. It was Matt Guokas. I think it was Matt Guokas that once said, former NBA player, former coach, former analyst. I don't know if he still does it anymore. But I remember him saying if Shaq had any touch around the basket, him being so strong and with huge hands, he said if Shaq had any touch, he would shoot more around 70% from the floor. At the time, I thought he was hating. I get it. I used to do the same thing. Maybe just hating because, the players today are bigger, stronger. But after really analyzing Shaq's career and looking at things, he's correct. Shaq, as big and strong as he is, should have shot a higher percentage. Give you another example I'm talking about. Wilt Chamberlain, when he played with the Los Angeles Lakers, right? When Wilt Chamberlain played with the Los Angeles Lakers, when he incorporated a power game, no longer a finesse game, he mimicked Bill Russell. He stayed in the post for the most part, and he more or less this is when he was the fourth or fifth option offensively, and he played the Bill Russell game, grabbing boards, oftentimes trying to dominate the defensive boards to utilize the fast break with the outlet passes and shot blocking and playing great post defense, right? If you look at his centers, if you look at his seasons, he shot in that era now 64%, 68%, 63%. His last year shooting 72.7%, which I'm not sure if that's a record anymore, but it was a record for many, many years, but still not the record. And this is at the downside of his career. So, when you look at Shaq offensively, he was raw at first. He added, of course, the drop step and spin move and all that. Added a couple of moves to his repertoire. But at the end of the day, Shaq pretty much relied on his brute strength. Shaq got away with something because he was Shaq for a very long time when he was playing, where he would lean his shoulder into his man. Now, it was all in one fluid motion, and it just looked like brute overall strength. But if you remember toward the end of his career, when he was playing with the Boston Celtics, and the NBA was starting to change a little bit as far as how the game was played and uh, how they how officials officiate the game when it comes to centers. You might remember him; he was always getting in foul trouble, and he was often fouling out. And because of the fact that it was the only way he could really fucking score, he was oftentimes ineffective and was often fouling out of games. And one of the things I like to note is that when Wilt Chamberlain was playing in his prime years, you couldn't lean your shoulder into a guy like that. That's why most big men at that time who were dominant scorers, they had to develop a game. You had to really develop an offensive game to be a scorer. You couldn't just rely on your brute strength. You know what I'm saying? Now, I think as the NBA transitioned into the late 70s into the 80s, then they kind of laxed on that, all right? But that's one thing I want to attack with Shaq offensively. Defensively, Shaq was, I would say, at times above average, but he still was not as dominant a defensive player, in my opinion, as, say, Bill Russell, who, by the way, won he was on the first all defensive first team, 1968-69, which was his last year when he was 35 years old. Even though that was first introduced in 1968-69, and despite the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, Wilt missed almost all of the entire 1969-70 season with a leg injury, right? Wilt was still on as many defensive teams from 68 to 73 as Shaq was on his entire 19-year career. Shaq was often dwarfed defensively by other players in his era. Whether you're talking about Alonzo Mourning, That's almost as far as defensive prowess. Alonzo Mourning, Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace. Uh, you know, there are others. Mark Eaton, but he might have been a little bit before Shaq's time. Shaq was a great player. Admiral Dave Robinson's another one. I would even say that I think Pat Ewing was a more uh, aggressive defensive player than Shaq. Okay, which is one of the reasons why he was dunked on a lot of times. The reason why guys like Mourning and Ewing were on so many posters, and Sean Bradley's another one, is because they always went for the shot block. They were more aggressive defensively. You know, unlike Shaq, who sometimes was selective with who he would be aggressive against. You know what I'm saying? It's one thing to be defensively aggressive against a little ass point guard that's coming in and you're trying to make a example out of him. But then when you see Derek Coleman come when he was in his prime, or when you see Vince Carter coming down the lane, you know, you move out of the way because you don't want to be on a fucking poster. So on the defensive end, Shaq was great, was really good, but not as dominant. Oh, and Akeem Olajuwon, of course, I haven't said him. Akeem Olajuwon is another guy that was far more dominant defensively than Shaquille O'Neal. If I'm not mistaken, Olajuwon's led the NBA in shot blocks, and he's led the league in rebounding. Shaq was a good shot blocker, but he never led the league in shot blocking, and he never led the league in rebounding. Okay, as big as he was, especially as he got older, he was not as he got older and he put on more muscle. It made him stronger. It made him less resistant to the pounding that he would get down low, but it also limited him defensively. The Orlando version of Shaq from 92 to 95, in my opinion, was the best version of Shaq as far as athletics and defense and rebounding. After that, when Shaq got bigger, he was not as good with his movements down low. If he could time a block shot, he could make if he could time you, he could send it to the third row, um, make a highlight reel. But all in all, he wasn't the same defensive player that he was when he was younger. He didn't have the durability of some other centers. After 95, he was often, injured a lot of times due to the fact that he just wasn't in basketball shape coming into the seasons, as opposed to, some Iron Men, big men for their era like Dolph Shays and Karl Malone and, even Moses Malone. You know, uh, they were a lot more durable. You know what I'm saying? Even Olajuwon, in comparison, was a lot more durable. Olajuwon also had a much more versatile offensive game than Shaq, which was one of the reasons why he was such a nightmare for defenses. And just how dominant is Shaq? Let's think about this, okay? Um, let's compare him to Wilt right quick. Shaq played 19 seasons. Wilt played 14, really 13, but let's credit him with 14 seasons. Wilt in 1961-62 alone had a mind-boggling 45 games of at least 50 points or more. In one season, 61-62, he had more 50-point games than anybody else has had in their career. Second place Jordan with 31 in the regular season and 8 playoffs. So, that's 39 in Jordan's career. And that's behind what Wilt did in one season. For his career, including playoffs, Wilt had 122 50-point games. 122. Jordan had 39. Kobe had 26. James Harden has 23. Shaq had three. Three. Just three. And they all came on against subpar teams. One I remember, I think, was toward the end of the 93-94 season when he was battling David Robinson for the scoring title. I think it was against the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think he scored 53. I remember him having I believe, a 50-point game during the 97-98 season against the then New Jersey Nets, who would go on to be the 8th seed. And of course, on his birthday in 2000, he scored a career high 61 against the lowly, abysmal Keith Kloss led at the center position. I think it was Keith Kloss. Or was Oliver Condi. I can't remember. It was still a bad fucking team. Against the Clippers, a horrible team. Compared to Michael Jordan, no, not the same position, just one comparison. Jordan had 39 50-point games. 23 of those came against top 10 rated defenses. Hence why 8 of them came in the playoffs. Kobe has had many 50-point games against really good, talented teams. The Dallas Mavericks, 62 and 3/4. Phoenix Suns, the 50-point game in the playoff that came for Kobe. Shaq really, no. I just never saw it with him to that degree. I'm not saying he's not great, but I don't understand why some people look at him as the most dominant force in NBA history. I don't see that at all. This is a guy that time and time and time again, as I said before, got swept out of the playoffs. He got swept in 94 by the Indiana Pacers. He got swept in 95 in the finals. They did make it to the finals. He got swept in 96 in the Eastern Conference Finals by the Chicago Bulls. In 97, I think they lost in 5 to Utah. In 98, they got swept by the Utah Jazz. In 99, before Phil Jackson arrived, okay, and before Kobe really became Kobe, they got swept by the San Antonio Spurs. And you know what's interesting in all these series, too, for the most part? The opposition usually had a guy that knew when to step up. Whether you're talking about the Pacers and Reggie, or Olajuwon and how he dominated Shaquille O'Neal, outplayed him in the finals in 95. Michael Jordan, after kind of being a little bit ordinary for him in the first 3 games, said fuck it, and game 4 went off for 45 points to close the sweep in 96. Or whether you're talking about Karl Malone, whether he was dropping a 40-point, 18 rebound performance or something like that in 97, or dominating in 98 against the Lakers. Even though the Lakers were a more talented team on paper, Utah's pick and roll offense was just a work of art by that time. It was a deadly machine of precision. Even Tim Duncan, I remember him going off against the Lakers in '99 en route to the NBA Finals. And you know what Shaq was doing at that time? Shaq was playing okay. He was playing okay, but he wasn't dominating like he's supposed to. He was mirroring his regular season numbers, 27 points, 11 rebounds. That's good. But he's supposed to have been dominating. He did not start dominating until Phil Jackson probably got on his ass about that. And also, coincidentally, the centers of the 90s began to bow out. And now he was going up against, guys like, Rick Smits with bad feet on his way out, or Todd McCullough, the Matt Geigers, he was, even though Matt Geiger's not a center, but he was going up against guys like that, you know what I'm saying? It's hard not to dominate against guys like that. And it's also when he started getting on, I think, all defensive teams, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 2000s, after Elijah Wan and Ewing and David Robinson and all these guys were starting to fall off. So basically, this is what I'm trying to say, man. Shaq is a great player, okay? But don't let his four rings argument um, put you at the disillusion that he dominated his era, okay? And also, he had a lot of help along the way. This is a guy that during his career, he played with guys like Scott Skiles. I'm not saying he's a Hall of Famer, but he was a pretty pretty good point guard. Okay, he played with Scott Skiles, Penny Hardaway, who, if not for injuries, would have been in the Hall of Fame. Horace Grant he won more championships, might have had a case to be a Hall of Famer. At one point, he was playing with one of the more exciting backcourts in Dennis Scott and Nick Anderson, as far as shooting the basketball. Not saying they're Hall of Famers, but they were guys that could put the ball in the basket. This is a guy that played with, of course, Kobe Bryant, Nick Van Exel, Eddie Jones. I believe he was playing with Cedric Ceballos for at least one season. Robert Ory, Rick Fox. Now, I won't mention Mitch Richmond or Ron Harper because they were older, but I'm going to put their names out there any fucking way. Then, of course, he played with Dwayne Wade, Antoine Walker, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, LeBron James, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Steve Nash, even though he always railing on him. And I know I'm forgetting some people. Sean Marion. He might have played with Jason Richardson if I can't remember if he was still there in 2009. This is a guy that's played with talent. Rajon Rondo. This is a guy that's played on talented teams. Okay? So at the end of the day, yeah, I get kind of annoyed with his shit, man. You know what I'm saying? But tell me what you guys think, man. No, some of you not going to agree with me, but tell me what you guys think.